Fantasy people, welcome back to another video. Well, that was an utter shit show of a bye period. I copped the double Carlton injuries in Marchbank and Durden. I had Owens with that concussion the week before. I had Zorko, I had Gawn, I had Butters just before he was about to post one of his best scores of the season. So, utter chaos. Condolences to those people who picked up Braden Preuss. That just really hurts. I do feel for you. And rest in peace to Teakle as well, who was one that I didn't pick up, but I know a lot of people did. So, the good news was I didn't have an absolutely terrible round. I did score 17-14, which is not great, dropping me in the rankings from 7th to 30th. Not ideal, but given the carnage, I think it's alright, and I think we can still attack that top 10 over the coming rounds. Now, the question on everyone's lips is, what are we going to do with all this carnage? We have a lot of forwards and rucks that are on the injury bench this week, so who are we going to bring in? And I know a lot of people are talking about Luke Jackson with that number one ruck role at Melbourne. So what I wanted to do this week is have a look into the stats, compare him to some other similar type ruckmen, have a look at the number one and number two ruck dynamic in some other teams, and see if we can find anything to predict how Jackson is going to do, because I do not want to bring in a guy for 500k or whatever he is and he just sits there scoring 60s. So, first up, I want to look at the St Kilda dynamic in their rucks of Ryder and Marshall and see what they can do as number one and when they're paired together. So, I had a look at the stats of those two guys over the period of 2021 and 2022. So, Marshall in particular as that number one ruck role, when he is alone, he can score quite well. So, over the 2021 and 22 period, he averaged, without Ryder, he was able to put up 99 points per game. So, he is a 100 guy when Ryder is not in the team. Then, when he is playing with Ryder, so when he sits in that number two ruck role and he goes forward, he can only manage to average 73 points per game. So that is a plus 26 differential. If we apply that to the Max Gawn Luke Jackson, with Luke Jackson stepping up into that number one ruck role, that would put his current 69 average up until a 95 average. Now that would be unreal. I'd be taking that. But as we know, we can't really do that. We can't just apply that same situation. Luke Jackson's a 20-year-old ruckman, only a second-year player. We can't apply that exactly the same compared to the Marshall one, he's a 26-year-old, and he's done it before. He's actually scored fantasy points for us. So we have to have a look at Luke Jackson's raw data next. So what does he do in a game? Averages 75% time on ground, which he's done for the last two seasons. That's all good. Now the CBAs, he's gone up 10% from 2021 to 2022, averaging now 36% per game as they sort of groom him for that number one ruck role. Looking at his stats, he averages 15 touches a game, Luke Jackson, which is actually quite good for ruckman in the disposal realm. So he is a ruckman that gets around the ground and picks up statistics. He gets clearances when he is in the ruck because he's quite good at ground level. But what he doesn't do, and what is the most alarming thing about his stats as a ruckman, are that he only averages 9 hitouts per game, and that is well below average. He averages 3 tackles, which is fine, and this year he is going at 69 points per game. So what we really need to find out about Jackson as the player is when he does get increased CBAs and an increased role in that team, how does he perform in a fantasy sense? So I went through all his career highs, kind of had a look at his best games and what kind of role he had when he had those best games. So I want you to focus here on the green box to the left down below. So that's his 2022 highest CBA numbers. So we're going to look at that first. In that year, he had 4 games that particularly stood out with high CBA amounts. The first one was in round 5, where he had 41% of the CBAs. In that game, with that amount of CBAs, only 6 hitouts for 65 fantasy points. So not really giving us any info to pick him up there. Round 8, he also had a bump, 46%. Only scored 41 fantasy points. In round 10, he was given 46% again and averaged 64 fantasy points. So you can see there's not a lot of correlation between the CBA bump and him actually scoring points. In round 13 this year, 42% of the CBAs, and he did manage to score 82 points. Now, that gives him, over that period, that's 43.7% average CBAs over those 4 games. and he averaged 63. So he actually averaged 6 points below what he averages in the regular sense, showing that when he does get a bump in CBAs, it's not massively improving his score. In fact, it's actually going down a little bit worse. Now, if we go up to that yellow box at the top, or that rectangle, that shows his 2021 and 2022 highs in particular statistics. So the ones I want to focus on there are the disposals, which is a high of 22 over the 2 years. Now, that's really good for a ruckman. That's sort of Tim English territory. That's the guys that get the high disposals. The problem is the hit outs. So his height of hit outs was 22 if you go over to the right there. And his highest fantasy scores sit at 100 and 112 over the 2 years. So it does show that he can put up over 100 score, but they were sort of flash in the pan scores, and they didn't correlate, like we said with the bottom box, they didn't correlate with the CBA rise. So he's not getting them because he's getting a better role. They were just sort of a flash in the pan big score. Now, that green box to the right, that shows his 2021 data. And again, they are the games where he had the highest CBAs for that season, and he only posted scores of 78, 62, 50, and 83. So he's not begging us to pick him with those ones, and we can't find any correlation between a CBA rise and fantasy point scoring rise. So that's not great. So the last thing that I want to do is compare a similar type player. So the best one that I could find was Tim English. Tim English is a similar player in the fact that he doesn't win a lot of ruck contests, but he's very good at ground level. He gets the clearances and he gets around the ground, and the team want to use him. Luke Jackson also has that similar athleticism that can get his disposal rate up. He gets the clearances. So looking at Tim English, the other thing that was similar about that actually was that Tim English also played half of last season as a ruck forward, as the second ruck, and he played the second half when Steph Martin went down with an injury as the number one ruck. So the main parts of this data I want to look at are, if you look at the CBAs in the top right-hand corner, he averages 87 this year, so that's top level, and it really shows with his fantasy scoring, which has gone to 112 this year. Last year, he only averaged 50% of the CBAs, and more importantly, if you look at that orange box down below, in the first half of the season, he averaged 30% CBAs, and in the second half of the season, when there was no Steph Martin and he was the number one ruck, he averaged 70% of the CBAs. The really interesting thing here is that going first half of the season to the second half of the season with his fantasy scoring, is he only averages 79 points in the first half and still only 82 in the second half. So he got the bump in the CBAs. He went from 30% in the first half to 70% in the second half, and there was really no benefit in his fantasy scoring. I believe that the bump this year that he's had is more of a career development step. So he does have more CBAs again this year, going up to 87% in 2022, but I think he's just developing as a player. He's now 24 going on 25. He's had that extra year, that extra preseason, and that's just bumped him up, and he's having a real breakout this season. So what does that mean for Jackson? For me, I'm not touching this one. I would not go anywhere near this. We have no evidence to suggest that Luke Jackson is going to be a consistent high fantasy scoring player. He's getting a better role in particular games is not particularly helping him. So we have no evidence to back it up. I'm going to stick with a safer option. I'm going to look for someone like a Tim Taranto, who I know can score in fantasy and has done in the past. What do I think Jackson is going to score? My predicted average for him is somewhere between 80 and 85 points. I do think him playing in that number one role while Gawn's not there, he will step up a little bit. He'll have a greater responsibility, and the team's placed a lot of faith in him. So I do think it'll give him a bump, but not enough to warrant us picking him up. It's not going to be a Darcy Cameron 2.0. Guys, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy it, I really hope that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be trying to put out a lot of these videos over the coming weeks up until the end of the season, so please watch out for them. Everybody, good luck this week in fantasy. I hope we don't cop too many more injuries, and I'll see you next time.